It's for our final session of the day. Joining me on stage is Catherine Blades, SVP, Chief ESG and Communications Officer at Aflac, Tony Savone, SVP, Global Communications at General Motors, and Maggie Fitzpatrick, SVP, Corporate Affairs, Philanthropy, and Customer Engagement at Exelon. Please welcome them to the stage. Thanks so much for joining us. One of the big themes, we've had a lot to take in over the last 2 days, and I think it's been a terrific discussion, case studies, and lots of issues raised. But I wanted to try and synthesize them for the people and give us some discussion points to use moving forward, because this is an ongoing conversation. People are still working it out. There's no playbook. But one thing that really struck you, Catherine, I know, was this concept of the power of and that sort of came out, especially yesterday. Do you want to talk about why you felt that was so significant and why that should be a key takeaway?
I do, but first I want to say thank you to everybody who put on this conference. It demonstrates amazing leadership, and it is long, long overdue. So kudos to you and your staff.
Thank you to all our team who've been working diligently over the past 2 days and long before. They've done a fantastic job. So yeah, thank you.
So the power of and basically stems from you're better with the and. You and me can do more than either or even more important and more relevant to this discussion is purpose and profit. You can have both. You don't have to decide one or the other. As long as you do both and do both authentically and legitimately, you can have it all.
Okay, so how do you see that playing out? What should people be doing more of in that respect?
Well, I know this concept of authenticity and integrity kept coming up over and over and over again. We've spent a lot of time talking about our robotic duck, the My Special Aflac Duck project. That would not have been a success. Actually, it would have been an abject failure if it was a one and done, but we had spent the previous 24 years raising $136 million for the research and treatment of pediatric cancer. So we had this authentic story, we had these engaged employees, and I think it is more about not trying to, we heard a lot about innovation for innovation's sake. Don't try and chase a shiny new object. Don't try and chase the shiny new cause. Really look deep at what your employees want. Ask them. And it's amazing, but of course, if you ask someone, you have to be prepared to act.
And listen.
And listen, indeed.
Maggie, you wanted to talk about accountability and true engagement and how that matters.
Yeah, I think for us at our company, we're really focused on engineering purpose into everything that we do, particularly as it relates to some of the philanthropy. So our company gives away $50 million annually in the communities where we operate, and it's a big number. And what we're most proud about is that our employees are kind of the front lines of that giving. We have systems in place, technology, mobilization tools that enables our employees to engage in purpose and be the ambassadors for our brands in the community. And I think being intentional about that, so it's one thing to say it, but creating systems that enable it are really, really important. And then because we have those systems, we can measure our effectiveness. And that gets to your point about accountability. We believe strongly that purpose is really critical to our work as corporate affairs professionals, and that we are the conscience of the organization and often responsible for making sure that our company is doing the right thing, because we gather information from stakeholders and we bring it into the company and inform strategy. So often we have to be courageous in those conversations.
Yeah, that brings us on to your point, Tony, about being bold, brave, and courageous. That's come up again and again, hasn't it? It's not easy to do, but you have to try it sometimes.
It's not easy to do, but I think Maggie makes a really good point here when she talks about we bring in information, but being bold isn't just about being the loyal dissident that we know that's a role we play. And it's not just, purpose isn't just about being an advocate or having advocacy. How about being bold enough to create the discussion so that you as a company can get your leadership team and their heads around what is really authentic for your companies or the companies you represent or any of the other institutions. Because if it isn't part of the fabric of what it is you do, and if you don't have the ability to have the discussion with senior leadership and the buy-in, then all you're going to find yourself doing is fighting all the time. And yes, you can come in and bring in the ideas and everything and the inputs that you're getting from outside. But if you're only arguing about those to say you need to change, you need to change, you need to change, then I don't think you've been courageous enough to start with how do you have the conversation and how do you influence the organization to accept that there's a role that they're going to play and that the company itself is only going to be true to a real purpose if all of senior leadership owns it. It's not just a public affairs, but we do have a really critical role to play. And I think we heard right from the beginning, be bold enough to be creative, be bold enough to do this, be bold. I think it's really important to be bold enough to create the structure to have the conversation and know where your weaknesses are so that you can get other people to come in and have part of that conversation as well. When that all happens, then real purpose comes out of it.
I think, too, I was reflecting on this. I think it's being bold not in a grandiose way, right, but bold in those micro moments. I was thinking about my first year at the company, and we were having a discussion about how to retain senior women in the organization. The retention in the energy sector isn't strong for women, regrettably. And so this conversation ensued. I'm new to the company, and I said, well, what are our policies that would help enable retention of women? And one of the leaders of the company, a gentleman, said, well, what do you mean? What kind of policies? And I said, for example, how are we on paid family leave? And I looked over and I saw in one micro moment, one of the other women executives rolled her eyes. And he had the emotional intelligence, my colleague, to notice that. And so we had a conversation about our policy and then quickly pivoted. We kind of doubled the amount of leave. We made it available to men and women. We allowed gay couples to have the same kind of parental leave that would be appropriate for other kinds of couples. We'd had parental health care leave but it was that moment, right? The rolling of an eye that said, this really isn't okay. And then having a team of people who are courageous and bold enough to say we have the power to change it and then to do it. And we led the industry in coming out with a very progressive and very important policy on paid family leave. We did something similar on pay equity for women as well.
I think this is a really important point, not just on the subject matter that you talked about, but these are going to be very special moments in time, and you need to be prepared, or we all need to be prepared, to take advantage of those moments when they present themselves and to be listening well enough that we're not formulating our next argument while the conversation is going on, but being able to catch that moment and then do it. I remember one of the conversations, and Stephen, you and I have talked about this before, where we were working through our purpose as a company, and I challenged Mary Barra, our CEO, on would you accept that we have had unintended consequences with 100 plus years of an automobile? Will you accept that people do crash and die in vehicles? Will you accept that there has been pollution? And will you accept that in urban centers, people are going nuts sitting in traffic? And she was the first CEO to kind of start to talk about that in a way that said, yeah, okay, if I accept those things, then we need to solve for those things. And that became the genesis of really starting to articulate the purpose for the company, which is a belief that we see a world with zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion. And so it was just that one moment in time, though, where we just needed to kind of get our heads wrapped around it and solve for the real issue, which then made it authentic for us because that's what we do.
Yeah.
Well, but you both bring up a good point. Be bold enough to embed it in your business practices. Because if it's a standoff, a one-off, a standalone opportunity, you might as well be purpose washing, right?
Absolutely.
By the way, I should have explained at the start, we took these themes from the Purpose Wall, which a lot of you have put some thoughts on. So thank you for that. So we've kind of crowdsourced this session a little bit, and each of the panelists has picked up a couple of points that they
We stole your
particularly
ideas.
resonated with them. So the purpose wall worked, and thank you for showing it some love. And we will take the purpose wall back with us, and we will do more on that. So yeah, do you, on that bold and courageous thing, do you ever feel any pressure to do a Nike or do a Gillette? You know, do you ever get that from internal stakeholders or even, you know, from customers?
You do, but if you're doing the one-off and you're reacting to something like that, if it's not tied to your purpose and your values, which need to dictate those moments. So when something happens and you're impacted, anything that happens in the world, whether it's trade or politics or economics or just about anything, it feels like we're impacted. So we could be reacting to everything. So what we have to do is we stop and look at what is our purpose and what are our values, and then that dictates whether or not it's worth engaging. Sometimes engaging, can't remember who now was on stage talking about it was Josh. He was saying,
Josh Ernest,
yeah, he said sometimes the best action is no action, and sometimes it is. But there are times where, for us, some of the best action is creating the conversation within the company so that you have dialogue rather than sound bites and divisiveness that just lets it stand on its own. And when you create the dialogue, then people start to find the ways that they see and feel and understand each other. And that's way more powerful than let's just be pissed off at each other and yell at each other.
Yeah.
I think, though, Steve, to that question, though, I think it has to be core to your brand proposition, and that begins, as you all well know, with understanding what your core brand proposition is, and understanding, using data and analytics and measurement, what it is, what your stakeholders expect of you as a company, and making sure that that's aligned. The things that we take bold action on are those things that are directly aligned with our stakeholders' expectations. And so for us, you know, the easy one is climate change. So we've just launched a $20 million investment vehicle where we are seeding investment in communities where we operate for those who are innovating solutions for climate change. We've doubled down. We said we want a significant portion of that investment to go to women and minority-owned organizations. So I think it's really important that when you take bold steps or make big investments, that they be directly aligned with your value proposition and your brand.
Yeah. Catherine, you wanted to pick up on social impact. Do you want to build on that one?
Well, that's actually a perfect segue from what Maggie just said, because the measurement is going to be key, but you want to make sure you're measuring the right things. And we don't want to measure activities and tactics as much as we want to measure outcomes and results and the real true impact. And that's harder, but it creates so much more value to the organization, so much more engagement from all your stakeholders, and it's just a much better narrative that will get you so much mileage and traction across the board.
Yeah, and it can result in profit and better business outcomes, but it doesn't have to.
Well, if you're looking for that, then your head is not in the right place. I mean, this should be something so germane that it just eases into your business model. It should just work. And I mean, Unilever is way ahead of the game. And I talked to their former purpose communicator, and he said, you don't understand. The sustainability plan is the business plan. So every decision they make, they have to make it through the lens of sustainability. And does anyone here do work in Europe? Okay, so going beyond GDPR, the UK Parliament agreed, and they haven't done this since World War II. And in World War II,
agreed on anything.
well, that's I'm not going to criticize your folks, but it's fascinating because.
But now that you open the door,
No, but it's fascinating. I'm sorry, and it's fascinating. Yes, and it's fascinating that you had to be here yesterday to get that. During World War II, they created an agreement that said that any law that came before, that they would vote on, they looked at through the lens of how it would impact the war effort. Well, earlier this year, they did the same thing, but with climate change. That's going to change the game for a lot of people if that continues.
Absolutely.
Yeah, carry on, Tony.
Well, this idea of social change and what you're really driving, I think Aaron said it really well. He said it's purpose, not PR, and that fits obviously the theme of the last couple of days. But if we're looking at what it is we're really going to influence, then measuring whether you got coverage on it is truly kind of stupid. And frankly, we need to have a higher cause than that. And that higher cause needs to be what it is that we are driving, that change that we've signed up for, that is part of what the direction of the company is or what the institution is. And if you align that, then it does naturally become the filter by which you make decisions on the business plan. And it actually makes things a lot easier when it's that clear.
Yeah, Maggie, you were going to build on that, on measuring all outcomes and not just picking certain ones.
Yeah, we are very, very precise about the measurement, particularly as it relates to the work that we do through our foundation. So those programs that we have in various cities, for example, we're really, really clear on not the number of dollars that we're giving, although that is top of mind always, but or the number of programs that we're launching. What we look at is the number of lives we've touched and how many young girls do we put into the STEM academies, or how many people, young girls, are we signing up for the Icebox Derby here in Chicago, which my colleague Jean Medina runs, who's in the audience, which is an amazing program. And so, but we want to understand how we're affecting lives, which is very different than the traditional way of measuring philanthropy, which is, okay, we gave X amount of dollars to these amount of organizations and these cities, and you know, and they may have used it in this way or that way for these many programs, but the point is that we are changing people's lives. And so that's critically important, and I think it also shifts the mindset of the organization and resets what's most important, which is the actual outcome versus the transactional piece that gets you there.
Right, so since this is a PR Week conference,
Yeah.
and we've got a lot of PR professionals in the room, I think a good place to end this thing is, Tony, something you were going to lead on, which was that communications is the right place or the appropriate place to lead on purpose and authenticity in enterprises and organizations.
Yeah, I think we play a critical role in generating the discussion, bringing the inputs from various stakeholders. And the one thing that we do extraordinarily well professionally is we engage audiences in 360-degree communications, the definition of communications. And this can't be an output that's one way. This has got to be engagement, and the engagement with other principals who are helping you with whatever social change you're trying to drive. It might be in various cities bringing organizations that have similar purposes, but they're not exactly the same. But if you align them both, then you'll both drive more change than you would otherwise by paying two different administrative staffs to do something. And we just have the ability as professionals, and I think we have the responsibility as professionals, to drive the conversations in our companies, to own that the output of that and the narrative that comes from that is not a narrative to get you credit. It's a narrative to drive involvement. It's a narrative to drive an organization's engagement and then the engagement of other stakeholders outside. And I think just the roles that we've all grown up with and the ability to create the kinds of conversations that aren't just one way and shouting from a mountaintop, it's what we bring. And I think I'm extraordinarily proud of what we do for a living. So.
Indeed.
Just to end on the CCO role, because we have seen some companies dispense with the role, and then we've seen other companies. We talked about this during the 2 days, where they got rid of the CMO and the CCO has taken on more responsibility. Now I know that different companies, different horses, different courses, whatever, and the individuals and the organisation is obviously involved. But it is kind of odd when you see a company like GE getting rid of their CCO function. What do you, for the future of the CCO or the Chief Communications position, I'll go down the line here, starting with you, Catherine. I mean, what do you think that says about the future of the top comms role in enterprises?
I think it's an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity to stretch and grow, and instead of just being the conscience, actually be the driver. I think I compared it to heart last night, a vital organ that drives things, that moves things throughout the system. And I think that we need to pivot more to the concrete. What do I mean by that? CSR is great, but ESG is where it's going. If you're in a heavily regulated industry, the disclosures are going to matter more than ever before. As much as you can get into that concrete space where you're truly that corporate affairs voice that has the seat at the table, and I hate that term, but it's really what it is, that can drive change through the government relations piece, through the general counsel's office. And, we've all been in those war rooms, right? And it really matters. So I don't think it's a problem at all, as much as it's an opportunity. Again, an opportunity to grow and to make the company even better. What we do need to get better at, though, is not to be glass half empty. We've got to do better at articulating the value that we already bring if we want to be able to do more. And that's going to be through metrics and numbers, bottom line.
Got it. Tony?
Yeah, I think some of it's a semantic argument as to who's named what and how does it work. I think the important piece for me has never been about what the title is or whether communications owns it 100% or marketing owns it 100%. Those battles have been going on forever. We got to get over ourselves a little bit on that.
Gives us something to write about.
It does give you stuff to write about. Yep, you guys entertain the heck out of us. But it's what we do and what is the power of the influence that we bring. And whether it's the CCO role as we've defined it today or a CMO role that is going to merge in a lot of ways in direct-to-stakeholder communications and engagement. Those are all going to happen, and I think I've, at least for 35 years, lived through communications having this inferiority complex to marketing because we never had the same amount of money, and that's all we did is whine about it. And it's just, don't worry about that. If you influence, and do that. And whether you're called the CCO or VP of Communications or Corporate Affairs or whatever, I think if you use the principles that Catherine was talking about in terms of can you drive value, then you're going to have a role, and it's an important role.
Maggie, last word with you.
Yeah, I would echo all that's been said. I think the Chief Corporate Affairs role is the most interesting role from my perspective because it brings together all of those disciplines and provides the company peripheral vision across all stakeholders about the state of the union, if you will. And so, from my perspective, I think the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer construct works really well, and it drives integration between, say, philanthropy and marketing and public affairs. And in order to succeed in that role, you need to have very, very strong business acumen, and you need to have a significant amount of courage. And you also need to understand how to succeed across all of those disciplines. But I think that construct, at least in my experience, has worked best.
Great. Does anyone have any last questions before we shuffle off? Let's go on at the back. Just say who you are and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Grace Gubrud, and I'm a graduate student at DePaul right now. A big theme over the past 2 days has been how this younger generation coming into this workforce really cares about corporate purpose, and I definitely think that's true for my colleagues and I. How would you suggest that we advocate for corporate purpose as people who are not the heads of organizations or communication?
Well, I will say we had a project over this past year where the management committee, the executive committee, of which I'm on, crafted a purpose statement for the organization. And I kind of said, I'm not so sure. Like, it wasn't really ringing with me. And so we ended up crowdsourcing our purpose. And I will tell you that there was a generational divide between what was written by the executive committee and what some of the younger members of our employee population contributed. We ended up going with the non-executive committee version, thankfully. And I think that what's really important for organizations is to make sure that we are open enough to inviting people into that conversation and making sure we have diverse consideration and thoughts about where our priorities should be, what kind of social impact we should have, how we should define our purpose. So I think that all employees have a role to play in that. And I think now, increasingly, we rely on all of our employees to kind of have a voice and step forward and offer perspective on social issues, on the direction of the company. And I think the great news about the emerging generation in the workplace is that they are super courageous and super bold, and I just celebrate them every day because they're moving us forward as an organization, and we need to move forward. But thank you for the question.
Grace, oh, I was,
Go ahead.
Grace, I was just going to say, profits and purpose. You're trying to influence business leaders. Make the business case.
Yeah. So, okay, that's kind of where I was headed. Was it's not enough to just bring up the issue, and certainly it's not enough to just whine about something. It's about changing organizations, and so our job is to create the openness so that we can hear you. But then you need to come in and be ready for a dialogue that's probably going to be challenging at times. And so I encourage everybody that it's beyond just the one step of, hey, you're not living up to X, Y, Z, darn you. It's what is it that we're trying to drive? How do we drive it? And what role do you play? And what role, I'm going to use the term influence again, which piece of that do you own and take responsibility for? Because leadership is not by title. Leadership comes from all places. And when you have that opportunity, I say seize the moment and be ready for it.
I was reflecting on Elijah Cummings, as many of you know, passed away when that was announced this morning. And one of his famous quotes was, I'm going to botch it, but the essence of it was that pain, passion, and purpose were the foundational tenets of his life. And so what I would say is in those moments of pain, whether it's pain in an organization, an injustice, an inequity, find your passion and advance your purpose. And I think, organizations only get better when people are all at the table and they have authentic voice to offer. And I think what you find more often than not is there usually is a receptive ear on the end of that conversation. And if you're in a situation where there isn't a receptive ear, then that's something you probably should reflect hard on. Because the key to success here is openness.
Great. That is a good place to finish, I think. Thank you so much, Maggie, Tony, and
Poor
Catherine.
Jean. She had
Round
one
of applause.
question back there.
Thanks so much.